Hi there. This is the Spiritual and Political Podcast. I'm Alan Zundel, and this is going to be a slightly edited version of a live stream I did on my other channel, A Christian Buddhist, a couple of weeks ago. I think it's worth repeating and may reach a few more people this way. So, whether you're watching it for the first time or repeating it, I hope you get something out of it. Thanks for watching. Today's topic is MMA. MMA does not refer to mixed martial arts, as you probably know. I'm using it to refer to meditation, mindfulness, and awakening. Awakening in the Buddhist sense, at least that's the language that I'm using. I am not trying to explain the teachings found in Buddhist tradition or Buddhist scriptures. What I'm doing is going to talk about my own experiences and what I have learned from them, but I conceptualize those experiences and the practices that led me towards those experiences using Buddhist language, because that's the language that helps me understand more clearly, or at least helps me put into concepts that I can convey through language what I think about what has been helpful to me in coming to a place where I felt my hunger for some type of spiritual transformation in my life, some kind of ultimate spiritual experience. My hunger for that has dissolved, not in the way I expected, with a very dramatic end point, but in a sense where what it was just different than what I expected. So let me get into the main topic here. You probably have heard of meditation and maybe even tried it, or maybe even a long time practitioner of meditation. And the word is Latin, so it does not come from Buddhism. It's our English word that we use to apply to some of the practices of Buddhism, which really are about training the mind in some way. And even in other traditions, including Christianity and some others that I'm only somewhat familiar with, like some of the Vedanta traditions coming out of India, that actually some of that tradition precedes Buddhism. There are two forms of what we would now call meditation. And both of them involve a training of the mind. Why are we training it? In order to prepare the ground for the consummation of this spiritual quest that people feel in their life, to reach a point where they have a harmony within themselves that dissipates that sense of hunger for completion, or that drive towards something different and better than what we ordinarily experience in life. The two forms of meditation are, number one, concentration meditation and mindfulness meditation. I'll start with concentration because that's usually the form that people begin with. I don't think it is a necessity for everybody to practice concentration meditation before they practice mindfulness meditation, but it is probably a good idea for most people undertaking this spiritual quest to start with that. Concentration meditation, as you might glean from the term, is a practice of concentrating your mind on something, focusing your attention deliberately. There are various ways of doing that, but they all involve in some way sitting quietly and continually returning your attention to a particular focal point. This could be a mantra, a phrase that you repeat in your mind and that you return to when you've lost your focus. or it could be an image of some kind, an inspiring spiritual image, or it could be your breath, as simple as your breath or your body, continually returning to the experience of breathing in and breathing out. So the practice of concentration meditation is having something as a focal point, and you will find inevitably that it is very difficult, probably impossible, to keep your mind focused on any one particular thing for a significant length of time. Usually within seconds, or at best minutes, you will find your mind wandering away from it into some fantasy or some thought process or some physical sensation that attracts your attention, and you lose that focus on something, on whatever it is you're using as your focal point for concentrating your mind. People get discouraged at this point because it seems hmm, so difficult, so formidable a task, given what you initially learn about your mind, to think that you can keep it concentrated on any focal point. It just seems impossible. That is the experience of sitting there. But I want to emphasize that it's not simply the practice of concentration that you're aiming at to have, perfect concentration where your mind never wavers from it. It's to strengthen your concentration, strengthen your ability to focus, even in minute ways, because this is going to make a big difference down the line. Now, I say not everyone needs concentration meditation because there are different ways of learning to concentrate your mind that do not involve a formal practice of meditation. Lots of things can concentrate your mind without your deliberate effort. Those are not the kind of things that are going to help strengthen your concentration. Like, for example, a very absorbing novel or movie or TV show or piece of music is designed to attract your attention and hold it, but it's not your effort. It's not any effort on your part. It's more the effort of the creator of that piece that made it something that is um, attractive to your attention in some way. So that's not helpful, but other things are, like learning to practice a physical skill, a sport. We can go back to the MMA, mixed martial arts. It takes a lot of concentration to learn a skill like that, especially if you're trying to aim at a high level. But any sport, tennis, baseball, anything that's going to require some discipline and focused attention can help do that. Other things as well, studying something difficult. Now, if you're on a topic that just absorbs you because you have a great interest in it, that's not as helpful as when you are studying something that you want to learn, but you find it difficult to learn. It forces you to make an effort to keep your mind trained on that subject. Another one would be learning a musical instrument. You have to focus on practicing, doing the scales, learning the methods. All these practices require some form of focusing the mind, and all of them can help prepare you for your mindfulness exercises, which I think are much more important. So, two things that I want to convey about this is, number one, it's important to practice a discipline that concentrates your mind, that makes you concentrate your mind in a deliberate way so that you have a greater ability to focus. Not a perfect ability, because that's beyond anyone's capabilities, I think. I don't know. It certainly is beyond mine, even at this stage of having practiced meditation for over 50 years. But the real benefit of this is that each time your mind wanders, there will come a point as well where you spontaneously become aware that your mind has wandered. That is a taste of awakening. That is when you become conscious of being conscious again. You might think it's a form of being conscious that you had been unconscious, but implicit in that is that oh, I was lost in a fantasy or some thinking about something. And now I am once again aware that I wanted to do something different. I wanted to keep my mind focused on something. That is a taste of awakening and becoming conscious of your present circumstances and your present state of mind. Even more importantly, becoming conscious of your own state of mind. So rather than being discouraged that you continually lose your focus, I think it's helpful, and this is how I've taught meditation in past years. It is helpful to notice how that awakening process can happen spontaneously, because each time you notice, that is strengthening your ability to notice it again. Sometimes I compare this to learning to identify some type of vegetation in a forest. So you don't have much of a background in biology or forest. Is it fauna or flora? I think it's flora because that sounds closer to flower. Maybe you don't have an ability, but somebody you want to learn about it, and somebody says, "Here, look at this picture," and then we're going to go off through a walk through the forest. And each time, I want you to look around and see if you can spot this particular plant. So each time you spot it, you're going to strengthen your ability to notice it. So that someday when you go walking through the forest, even without thinking about it, you're going to notice that plant. There'll just be uh, familiar way it looks will attract your attention and you will go, oh, I see it. So that ability to recognize the plant is the same thing as recognizing this taste of awakening. The more you notice it, the more you're going to notice it in the future. So it's not just strengthening your ability to concentrate your mind deliberately, but it's strengthening your recognition of a state of awakening when it happens. Not your ability to make it happen, but the noticing of it makes it more noticeable when it does happen. It may be something that in the past happened to you often, but you never made much of it. It just, oh, I was daydreaming. And then you go off and you're in another thought process and not noticing the transition or how unique it was that moment of being aware of what's going on in your own mind. Concentration. So mindfulness here is what I'm calling this sense of what is happening in the present moment, to be mindful of your own mind, not full of mind, but mindful of it, like aware of it, attentive to it, to your state of mind, conscious of it. So a mindfulness meditation practice is one in which you sit, you become relatively focused, and you start to focus not on a phrase or a picture, an image, or your body sensations, but you become focused and you keep returning your focus to this awareness of the present moment. But when you've lost yourself in a daydream and you suddenly come awake, what you want to do is say, oh, I'm going to return my attention to this state of awakeness, to this state of mindfulness. Mindfulness, just like concentration, can also be practiced outside of a formal meditation practice. In that, during the course of your day, you try to remain conscious of your present circumstances and your awareness of them. So you're aware that you are aware of the present moment and whatever may be going on in your head that is trying to yank you away from the present moment, ruminate on the past or speculate about the future or try to figure out a problem, whatever that mental process is, you're trying to, in your daily life, notice when that happens and try to hold it a little bit at arm's length, return to the focus on being aware of what is happening, even if what's happening is that fantasy world in your mind, you try to be aware of it. I first learned mindfulness not from any Buddhist teacher, but from reading about G.I. Gurdjieff, who was a very strange spiritual teacher from the early 20th century, early to mid 20th century, and a book written by one of his former disciples, Pyotr Ospensky, talked about a process of self-remembering. That's the phrase they used. Remember yourself. And by that, they simply meant waking up to the present moment. They didn't use that terminology, but it was the same thing. And a friend and I used to help each other remain mindful by anytime one of us came back to that sense of awareness of the present moment, we would say to the other, "Are you remembering yourself?" It became a habit that helped each of us to remember more frequently to be mindful of the present by, bringing that phrase to mind and also helping one another with it. But even when we were not together, the phrase would automatically come to mind. So that sense of, are you remembering yourself? That question is a good one to practice as well. And you can use that throughout your daily life to try to reinforce the sense that it's important to be aware of the present moment. Now, why is that kind of mindfulness important? You may feel calmer in the present moment. You may not, but you may sense that in this awareness, there is more intelligence, more wisdom. Maybe that's a better word. There's more wisdom in this awareness of the present moment than there is when you're speaking purely out of a mind state, out of a conceptual state. It feels like you have a better grasp of what is happening in the moment and can respond to that from a deeper place that's not always translated through deliberate analysis or anything like that. It's much more spontaneous. It comes from a deeper place. But initially, it's just going to seem like, what's the big deal? I'm conscious. Okay, that's throughout my life, I'm conscious. I may forget about it at times, and my consciousness may be focused on, my thoughts or my fantasies or something going on in the world around me. But why is it important to remain conscious of being conscious as well? Well, that state, that underlying state of being aware that is behind all your experiences in life. Anything you're conscious of, there is a consciousness that is conscious of it. And your sense of identity, who you are, what's happening in the world, and how you fit into that precedes, comes after your awareness. So there's consciousness is the ground, and mind stuff, perceptions are the field, if that makes sense. So the ground of your existence is this state of consciousness, of awareness. And it's not just yours. You, at some point, become aware that it is free of particular qualities such that everything may start with the more obvious, like every conscious human being shares the same consciousness. There's no differentiation between people in that ground of consciousness. Probably no differentiation between human consciousness and animal consciousness, and who knows beyond that, plants or whatever. I don't know. The sense of it is, when you go deeper into it, is that this whole world is encompassed within the consciousness that is shared universally. That's the sense. As I present it to you, it's probably more of a conception, more of an affirmation or a statement of a belief, but really that is how I experience this. So why is it important? Because even though you can notice that you're able to access consciousness, and you can reinforce your access to that so that you become aware more frequently, you are preparing the ground for something more significant, which I regard as the real initial awakening. You can have tastes of awakening in various ways, but this is where the thread that ties together your sense of separate identity, separate from the world, separate from other people, that sense that you are somehow an independently existing entity that just happens to be inhabiting this world dissolves, and you realize that you are part of the ebb and flow of everything that is happening. That sense of individuality can dissolve, doesn't completely disappear because it's always in the background, at least in the background, and always can be recalled and reconstituted. But that which holds it together as a kind of a prison lets loose. And what is that? The only way I can describe it really is that when you initially undertake these practices, you have the sense that your mind is still in charge. Your sense of identity is still very real to you. And a lot of that identity is wrapped up in your thoughts about yourself and your feelings about yourself. That sense somehow deep inside that I am something individual and separate. And that is the source of this dissatisfaction and the impetus towards the spiritual quest is that sense that somehow I'm separate from all this and I feel I've lost my home. I do not feel at home in the universe. I feel somehow that something is missing and I'm incomplete. That is exactly what it is. So what happens is you become aware that there is this universal consciousness behind your thoughts, behind your feelings, behind everything that constitutes your selfhood. There comes a moment where you snap from that individual sense constituted by thoughts and emotions about who you are. Snap from that into the consciousness. The consciousness becomes more of the foreground, less of the background. And the shift is from the identity trapped inside your thoughts and feelings about yourself as a separate individual to the universal consciousness as the ground that it is. And that's what I call the awakening of the mind, because the main thread holding this together is in the mind. You can feel at a visceral, emotional level that you are a separate individual, but really what holds that in place is a lot of thoughts about who that separate individual is, right? You can feel you are something separate, but you want to identify it. So your mind concocts these stories about who you are and can revise them often and distorts its memories or expectations or your perceptions of how other people are perceiving you. So your mind concocts these thoughts about who you are as a separate person and what the world is and how it works as something separate from yourself. And you're continually renewing that. And what it does is it kind of forms a protective shell around this visceral emotional sense of being separate. So once that thread is snapped and you move away from those thoughts become obvious to you as only thoughts, and you snap into the state of consciousness behind those thoughts, it allows deeper thoughts to emerge and be seen for what they are, accepted for the illusions that they are. That doesn't mean they have no existence, but they have existence. But illusions is not the best word in that sense because illusion implies that it has no reality, but it has reality in a relative sense. The reality that makes it seem the other stuff seem less real is the reality of this consciousness that's always there. That was probably pretty convoluted, but what I'm saying is the sensibility is that this grounded consciousness is much more real than anything else it is conscious of, such that those other things that have their own reality seem more like dreams or illusions with continually shifting forms and continually creating and dissolving what had preceded it. So your story of yourself is constantly changing. It has no permanent existence. All right. Finally, all right. So that's the awakening of the mind is when you shift, you practice long enough at focusing your mind and being aware of the present moment and being aware of the consciousness. There's a shift, spontaneous, not forced, a shift into that ground as you're ordinary abiding place, and the occasions when you become lost in thought or feelings become more insubstantial, more thin, less believable to you. Over time, your deeper thoughts and your emotional life, the various things that happened earlier in your life and throughout your life to kind of shape your feelings about who you are, those emotions start to emerge more clearly into the light of consciousness. And all of this can start to become thinner and thinner to the point where your very sense of selfhood finally comes out and becomes obvious as something illusory as well, something thin and insubstantial compared to who you now really feel yourself to be. So that process of awakening starts with tastes of awakening and momentary flashes of what it could be like and what that freedom from the self could feel like, moves into a deliberate practice when you start to train yourself to become more mindful, and then finally culminates, I shouldn't say culminates, but advances a big step into the awakening of the mind, which allows then further awakening in the deeper parts of your sense of selfhood that I would roughly categorized as including not only the awakening of mind, but awakening of heart at that emotional level, deep emotional level, and then awakening of the will, by which I mean the sense that there is a separate individual making decisions and moving through the world of its own volition rather than being part of the world responding and formed in the universe and then eventually to dissolve back into it, you might say. Thank you for checking in. I hope this was helpful to you. Best wishes for you and your quests.